Hello, it's really nice to have you all participate in this training webinar titled Boredom, the unmanaged craving that causes relapse. This is a topic I'm really passionate about because, in my experience with addictive behaviors, despite boredom being a big deal and a major motivator for going back to old habits, boredom is not really understood. Even in situations where it is understood and identified as a problem, the options available to address boredom are limited. For example, in Nigeria, where the options to handle boredom will usually end in a beer parlor or maybe somewhere similar, in the end, we'll still lead back to the old habits. Now, even if a person could change their environment and there are now different or various activities available to handle boredom, many times these activities will involve some good amount of money, which may still be another problem. So this webinar will unravel why boredom is such a big deal and why does the title of the webinar assume it's a craving. Next, we will train you on how to use specific tools in less than 10 minutes to help a friend or a patient overcome boredom with little resources available. We will be using this outline. First, we will introduce boredom in a different light. Then we will talk about what some rehabilitation centers do that could disadvantage the patient. Then lastly, we will tell you how to handle boredom in less than 10 minutes. Okay, so what's boredom? Now, people have said so many things about boredom. Some have said that boredom is something that is learned because nobody is born with boredom. Others say that it's something bad and must be escaped from. So before I say what it is, I would like your opinion. So let's now vote. How many of us think that boredom is an emotion just like sadness or anger? Please drop your answers. How many think that boredom is an urge or craving just like hunger for something or a drive or a desire for maybe sex, food, and thirst, etc.? Drop your comment or answer still. How many of us see boredom as a trigger that is something that triggers an emotion or an urge? So those in category A say boredom is an emotion. Those in category B say that boredom is an urge, and those in category C say that boredom is a trigger for emotion and urges. I'm curious, which of the categories did you choose? Now, in this slide, we will be comparing a normal drug craving experience on one side and a normal boredom experience on the other side. Now, the drug craving experience we are talking about here is the one that happens even after detoxification was completed, where those annoying withdrawal symptoms are no longer present. Don't forget, people still have drug cravings even after 2 months being clean from drugs. So let's first look at how you experience drug cravings. First, what do the books say? The International Classification of Diseases, version 11, and the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, version 5, they say that drug craving is experiencing intense urges or having strong desires. Also, the books say that drug craving is a subjective sensation, meaning that how one person experiences the urge can be different from the next person. So now we know what the books say about drug cravings. Let's now look at how drug users experience cravings even after detoxification has been completed. Number one, it is subjective. So one user can experience urges or cravings in a manner that is much different from the next person. Number two, in experiencing cravings, there is restlessness and discomfort. Thirdly, there is a desire to want to escape from this discomfort. Fourthly, when escape from this discomfort is prevented or the discomfort persists, there's usually associated emotions like anger, sadness, or anxiety. Lastly, the discomfort in drug cravings can be relieved using an appropriate distraction. Now, let's look at a normal boredom experience that everybody experiences. And by everybody, I mean people who don't use drugs as well as people who use drugs. So, first, we don't all experience boredom the same way. So, it's subjective, just like drug cravings. Number two, there's Usually restlessness or discomfort when we experience boredom, which is also present in cravings. Thirdly, there is also a desire to escape from this discomfort. Fourthly, usually there are also accompanying emotions when we experience boredom, especially anxiety and sadness. And lastly, boredom can be relieved using an appropriate distraction. So we could say that since everything in drug craving experience is what you would see in a usual boredom experience, craving and boredom are like twins. That is, they are very much the same, and you can't tell them apart. Now, it's possible that drug users mistake the boredom experience for drug cravings, and we know the consequences of wrong interpretations. There's more anxiety, feeling that they have failed in their recovery path, which may not have good outcomes. In this slide, we'll be looking at if the usual boredom experience also has attributes that are similar to a trigger, a drug trigger to be more specific. Now, are you familiar with the phrase, this person triggered me? Usually, what they are saying is that this person triggered either a thought or an emotion or a behavior. So, if this person was not involved, I would not have had those thoughts or emotions and I would not have behaved the way that I did. In the same way, once a drug trigger is present or activated, it should be able to influence or make a person start having thoughts, emotions, or engage in drug behaviors. Likewise, once a person is exposed to a boring environment, such as maybe listening to long lectures or church sermons or even being alone, this boring environment is able to make them start having thoughts. Sometimes it can evoke emotions and make them want to engage in certain behaviors. Now, I once interviewed a lady who went back to her ex. She said she was bored. She said, I was bored, and this made me start thinking about him. And the next thing I knew, I was at his front door. From this, we can say that boredom indeed has qualities that are similar to drug triggers. All right. With everything that we have seen in the previous slides, what is boredom? Seeing that it has attributes that are similar to a drug craving experience, as well as attributes that are similar to a drug trigger. Now, boredom can sometimes function as a trigger, being able to create thoughts, emotions, and behavior, while at other times it can be an urge or a craving that is a restless, discomfort like state that might not be different from the conventional drug cravings. That is, sometimes it can masquerade as drug cravings. It is interesting to note that once an individual experiences a boring environment, like being alone, listening to monologues, doing nothing, no tasks, no plans for the day, this will trigger a craving like experience, which then goes to serve as a trigger which would worsen the already existing craving experience. So we can see that boredom is a self sustaining cycle, and this can only be disrupted when a specific action has been taken. So in the previous slides, we mentioned that the boredom cycle starts with boredom as a trigger, followed by boredom as a craving experience, which is uncomfortable. And the only thing in the mind of an individual experiencing this is to do something that would help them escape or avoid this discomfort, boredom discomfort. My experience has shown that only when an activity has met certain requirements will it be selected as a preferred activity to escape the discomfort, even when many other alternatives are available at the moment. Now, there are two requirements that should be met before an activity will be considered as a preference to handle boredom. Requirement number one, the activity is easy and readily accessible at all times. And number two, and most importantly, the activity must be familiar, which means that the individual must have engaged with this activity several times in the past, such that it is now commonplace to them. And during those past engagements, they observe that the activity was able to cause relief from those thoughts and emotions that came from boredom. Now, the relief that they get from engaging the activity is called a reward. So, a reward is experiencing a relief from boredom because at that point, let's be honest, you were also entertained or you experienced pleasure. So, over time, the brain has now been programmed to engage that activity every time you experience boredom. So, in summary, boredom starts as a trigger, being exposed to a boring environment, followed by experiencing boredom as a craving, and then you now engage an activity to escape or avoid this uncomfortable experience of boredom. And this activity that you have chosen to take, you chose it despite having other options available. And the reason you chose it is because the brain had already programmed this particular activity. And once you engage this activity, you experience the reward, which is a relief from those uncomfortable thoughts and emotions and bodily experiences. Having discussed the boredom cycle in general, just because we want you to understand, we'll be more specific. So we'll now look at why an individual who has stayed some months after successful detoxification will now go back to using drugs. And we'll be using boredom as a reference point. On the left side, a while after the patients are done with rehab or detoxification, they will experience boredom as a cue and as a craving, and they would want a way out of it. The next thing is that they will tell themselves that they can't go back to drugs, but because of the preference rule of ease and access at all times and familiarity, the next best thing will be to contact their old friends or go somewhere that is familiar, maybe to hang out. So they eventually meet up with these old friends. Remember that they will be telling themselves that they would not use drugs. They just want to chill and have fun without drugs. Now, sometimes they are successful, they hang out, they have fun, and the boredom is cured without drugs being in the picture. Now, other times they are not successful, and just because the activity they had chosen involve their old friends and old locations, they end up using drugs. Now, both ways, their boredom has been cured, irrespective of if they cured boredom using drugs or they cured boredom by just chilling with their old friends or hanging out. So, over time, the brain reactivates and reinforces the fact that this is the only way to handle boredom. And over time, it becomes a habit all over again. So what you want to do is to put the patient in an environment where they can experience boredom repeatedly. Next, expose them to activities that can give them the reward. That is, activities that are pleasurable or entertaining enough to cause them a relief from boredom. Now, over time, reinforcement will occur at a subconscious level, and the new activities would now be integrated into the brain's preferences in choosing these activities in the midst of other activities. Now, it is important to mention that while this is going on, they should not be allowed to engage with their old fun activities for some time. This is easily done if they are in residential treatment or if they are coming from home. Measures can be put in place, such as having them delete the contacts of their old friends and other measures that would ensure that it's no longer easy to access old activities. Now, what eventually happens is that the brain will no longer associate these old fun activities with handling boredom. At the same time, it will now pair the new fun activities with handling boredom. So this is a summary of the previous slides. First, expose them to boredom, and while you're preventing them from engaging with their old fun activities, ensure that they frequently engage in the new activities that are also fun. It's important to mention at this point that it will be difficult for extinction to occur. That is, for the brain to impair the old fun activities while they are in rehab. It is best if the rehab environment is made to closely resemble the patient's home environment. So talking about non-ideal and ideal rehab center situation, one of the things that rehab centers are mostly known for is having so many activities that can be used as distractions. For example, games, playing sports, socializing with other patients or other staff. Now, this is both a good and a bad thing. A good thing because who doesn't need distractions? Of course, nobody likes to be bored. It's a bad thing because most of these distraction options will no longer be accessible to patients once they leave the facility. This means that even if the brain was now able to pair the new fun activities with handling boredom, like we had discussed in the previous slides, these new paired activities will not be accessible from home. And this would make it easier to go back to the old habits. Also, because rehab facilities give structure to their patients, including provision of fun activities, there may be no chance to experience boredom and allow proper pairing to be done with the new activities, of course. This might be one of the reasons why well equipped facilities might not be efficient if you're considering long-term relapse prevention. It's like going to a hotel to rest, and when you're done, you come back to face the problems that you left at home. The way forward is to prepare the patient while they are still in treatment to deal with the boredom that they would experience when they go back to their houses. We will now be discussing what usually happens when plans to handle boredom after rehab were not effected while these patients were still in treatment. After the program, what happens when they experience boredom is that they would now start thinking, scanning their minds for any available options. Now, because there was no plan already on ground, the thinking or contemplation process might be prolonged. And this will now lead to even more experience of distress, which would now disrupt the memory process that is needed to retrieve new skills that they had learned while they were in treatment. Now, if this happens, there is a greater likelihood that there would be reactivation of the memory processes that contain the old habits, which might now lead to engagement in their drug triggers, which would lead to more overwhelming craving and possibly drug use. So, having a list of new activities that they familiarize themselves with while they were in treatment might be what is needed to disrupt the above cycle from proceeding.